I'm Millie, and this is Stitches and Stories Studio, where your story begins. This podcast is about writing, creativity, and the path from first draft to first reader. Welcome to episode 5. This week is going to be about research, and I'll share a little bit about what I do for my research in different genres. And this came from a question from a listener week before last. So last week was about inspiration, and then this week will be the research. So let's get started. Now, for my thriller crime noir novels, that research was a little bit easier. One, I was co-writing it with a retired police officer, so a lot of the details of procedure and ideas for the crime that happens in the story and the places are all very real. This is a place where this person grew up, worked as a police officer for many years, and so the streets, the places, the names of people, the names of businesses and all were very fresh and something that he was extremely familiar with. So that part was easy. The inspirational part, that was the story itself, of course, couldn't be completely based in reality because we don't want to implicate real people and situations. Particularly that many years ago, it was in the 1970s that this story is set. So I did a lot of research with the local library up there, Prince George's County, Maryland library system, and then also with a couple of the universities up there that I was gathering information for characters in the book. So, a professor, and he may have taught this particular subject, and what was that about? And so I reached out to a reference librarian in Prince George's County and to the media services or public information officers at the university, and both of them were extremely helpful. I have a great relationship with the librarian in Prince George's County, and she sent me archived digital photos from the time of various places that I talk about in the books. So I did a lot of research there. I also did a lot of research on restaurants because my private detective has, a couple of meetings or interactions with people in some diners and things like that. And so I wanted that to be as realistic as possible. So I found menus from old diners that no longer exist that were there back in the 60s and 70s, and I really thought that was a lot of fun. Finding those pictures on Pinterest and just on the web in general, and being able to cross-reference them with the librarian who could verify that those places had existed. Research is not a chore to me. It's a ton of fun. I also get some more inspiration from those as well. So research and inspiration go hand in hand a lot of times, and some of those places maybe I couldn't use them in this particular story, but I saved them and can use them in the future series. So I encourage you to spend some time doing some research and enjoy it, lean into it. It's a lot of fun. And it's also different depending on your genre as well. Next, we'll talk about what I did for my romance genre. So I write a contemporary romance under the pen name of Len Story. And I did that because I felt like maybe I needed to write to market a little bit more, maybe try something a little less niche than my brand of science fiction. And so I kind of did some research into the market of romance and that sort of thing. And of course, and I'm sure you probably know, romance is the number one genre as far as sales are concerned. And there's tons and tons of evidence to back that up in the various subgenres of romance. The paranormal romance and the spicy romance, workplace romance, billionaire romance. There's all kinds of romance out there. But mine is strictly just contemporary romance, no spicy scenes, the sex takes place off the page type of thing. And I find that more entertaining just because I think your imagination can fill in the blanks a lot better than me telling you every possible thing that's happening. So that series, the Gates Point series, takes place in Hampton and Newport News, Virginia, two places that I've lived and worked, and so I'm very familiar with. I changed the name because I wanted to not be too specific, because I wanted to pick out the best parts of both places and maybe leave out some of the parts that aren't as great. The last name of Gates is an important name in the history of this area. So there's been a governor, a sea captain. In the 20s, there was Prohibition. There was a colorful character who bootlegged. His last name is Gates. So I picked that as a focal point. So Gates Point is the name of the two combined cities. And then I based it on businesses and people that I was familiar with. We have a strong fishing industry here for scallops and crab. So I use that in the stories. One of my characters, goes out on a scallop boat. Then there's people who own small shops and boutiques and things like that. And while I may have used the business type, it's not a specific business. And then the characters are a combination of people that I've met over the years. Again, I've worked in both of these cities. I've worked in these cities doing various jobs where I interact with the public quite a bit. So you meet a lot of colorful characters and interesting people. So I drew on that personal experience. And I did include some landmark locations. Fort Monroe is prominent in one of the stories for a wedding. Certain street names and things like that. So while I don't, again, focus on the name of Hampton and Newport News, if you read the stories and you're from the 757, you'll get it. You'll know that this is a local story. And I was saving that because the good parts, because I was thinking about doing Gates Point Nights or something, and doing something that's a little bit more less glamorous parts of towns and doing some kind of, something. I haven't really formed that out yet, but that was the initial thought process when I decided to rename the two cities and kind of merge them together in my story. The most challenging, but also probably the most fascinating research is what I do for my science fiction. And I'm going to give you links to all of these places in the show notes, but I love science. I was a science major at one point in my college career. I switched majors, but I started out in sciences. I love physics. Really got into rocketry when I was taking physics class, and we made a rocket in class and launched it off one of the buildings. It was fabulous. So, that sort of thing kind of goes hand in hand for me with science fiction. There are other elements and other sciences involved in space exploration things, of course, like the xenoarchaeology, which, is the main science that takes place in the Echoes of Eden series that I'm writing now. But just trying to make the science of it be plausible. We can't foresee the future. We don't know where technology will take us 100 years from now, 200 years from now. I mean, it could be completely unpredictable. But I try to read and listen to various science podcasts, NASA podcasts, research podcasts, about futuristic things, reading textbooks and just books on physics and the science behind getting us from Earth to Mars. What would that take? What is that? What are we planning? How long is that going to take? What would communication take to get back and forth? How long does that take to send a message to Mars and back if you had a colony there? And so try to find this information. And if I can't find it because it hasn't been done yet, then what I'll do is I'll take the most recent hard evidence that I can find for it, and then I'll go into AI and to chat or something and say, okay, here's what we know for sure right now. What are the possibilities for this? I want to put a colony on Mars. I want them to be able to live there somewhat independently, but maybe with, supply shipments, and they got to have communication back to Earth. How would that happen based on the technology presented? And I, maybe share the information that I found either in a podcast or something that I've read, and try to have it predict, how long that would take or what the possibilities were to take it a step further. Knowing what we know now about the principles of physics and Einstein, what if we took this principle, applied it 100 years from now? What are the possibilities? And that's inspirational. That part's not really research in the sense that, I'm going to take that information and make it hard, fast, facts in my book, but it gives me somewhere to go with it. And all of that's based on, science that I can get my hands on right now. Again, we've got here in Hampton, we've got NASA Langley Research Center. We have the Air and Space Museum. We have, universities with aerodynamics education programs. There's a lot of resources just locally to kind of talk to people and kind of figure out what the possibilities could be. And some of it's you never know if that's the way things are going to go. Something could be discovered that we didn't know about, or a new way to apply a science. But I've tried to do enough research to try and make the life in space and the universe that I'm building plausible, that it's not just pure fantasy. I don't want you to read it and think, where did she come up with this idea? I want it to be something that maybe you go and do a little bit of reading on and go, oh, okay, you kind of see where maybe she got that idea from or something like that. So now that's what I do. And depending on what you write and whether it's fiction or nonfiction, there are going to be hopefully a lot of resources out there for you, but you kind of have to know where to look. The local library is a good place to start. They have, even if you're not into physical books, but they have a lot of information in their digital archives. They have subscriptions to databases that, you might not otherwise have access to. Maybe they're expensive. So you can always go in and have the research librarian share with you what access you have or what they have access to and how you can get it. If you're close to a local college, their databases might be a little bit more robust than the local library for research purposes. And so, you can go in and see about a community membership, or a community library card for the university and use some of their databases and get some help. Universities tend to have subject matter specific reference librarians. So if you go in and tell them that, you want to research something on physics or you want to do some research on archaeology, or whatever, they'll have someone with that specific background to be able to help you. Writing nonfiction. Say you're going to write something about yourself, something about an experience that you've had, whether it's something traumatic that happened in your life or something fabulous, or like bodybuilding. You're into bodybuilding and you want to write about that and inspire others to do that as well and sharing your story. That's fantastic. Anything that you've experienced personally, you already have a resource, which is your own personal experience to draw from. But you also need to make it relatable because not everybody who may be a bodybuilder is going to have the same experience bodybuilding as you did. So you want to maybe interview other people who you compete with, or your mentor, or someone who coached you, got you started, inspired you to get started in it. And it may not have even been anybody else in bodybuilding. Maybe it's a spouse or something that, you talked to about them and they encouraged you. Then, you've got a whole library worth of books and resources and magazines and things that you can refer to, competition manuals that, you can do some research and share. People compete in different things. So some people are bodybuilding their own physique, some people are powerlifting, things of that nature. So it's a physical improvement type of sport, and there are various resources out there. They're normally a governing organization, like an accreditation body, will say, and they'll have rules and parameters for the sport, and you can refer to those as well for your references and things. So I encourage you just to, even before you start writing, maybe, you can do your outline, you've got your ideas, but, start kind of looking into it. How's this story going to be plausible? How is this going to make the reader believe that I know what I'm talking about? Even when it's fiction, it's got to be a believable story. So unless you're writing about dragons, and there isn't really tons of research on that, but you can also reference, let's say, dragons in literature. So you can do that sort of research and find out how the subject matter has been treated previously, and then find some inspiration and encouragement there, and how to, how is your subject matter going to differ from what's been done in the past, and how can you relate to that, and how will others see that? What you do need to be careful about is not repeating, not stealing, but using someone else's work. You don't want to get into a plagiarism situation. So if someone's already written an article about it and you want to quote it, make sure that you give credit for that if it's nonfiction. Or, it's a little bit trickier with fiction, because if you read a lot in the genre that you want to write about, sometimes it's hard to prevent bleed over. I try to be very careful when I'm writing science fiction not to include anything that's Star Trek specific, because I'm a huge Star Trek fan. And so things like, the propulsion system on a starship, I don't want to use the same one in my book because I don't want to infringe on anything that could be copyrighted within the Star Trek universe. Things like communicators and things like that. You have to be very careful about how you reference certain things. You don't want to get into trouble with copyright. Now, certain things are going to be kind of across the board universal in science fiction. You're going to have some sort of renewable energy for your starship, because where else, it's not like you can pull into a moon in a gas station and refuel or something. So you've got to have the similar concept. But if you're going to get into the explanation of it, you need to make sure that your explanation is original as possible, and that's where some of the jet or the propulsion systems and things to get from here to Mars come in my research. Like, how would we do that? And I want to make sure that it's not again, something that's been used in another universe story that I'm copying from. So you have to be very careful of that. A lot of programs have plagiarism checkers and like Pro Writing Aid, and I use that. So you just have to be very careful. You can also, if you think you've got an area that could be questionable, AI is good for that. You can plug in the parameter, like whatever you're talking about. If it's a spaceship propulsion, you can put in there and say, has this been used in any other series or stories or movies, whatever, that could cause problems with plagiarism, and it can check that for you. I'm not saying write with AI, I'm just saying it can be a useful tool with your writing to do that kind of research and try to help you stay out of trouble. And then, of course, I always put a disclaimer in the front of my books too. So you just want to be as careful as possible. Some people very much encourage you to read heavily in your genre so you're familiar with it. I don't do that personally. I do read in my genre, but not everything. I actually read more nonfiction than I do fiction. So again, it helps with my research, it helps with inspiration, but it's just also something that I'm interested in because I'm writing about things that interest me. So I will read books on physics and, like I mentioned before, string theory or quantum physics or, having to do with atomic energy, things like that. So I feel a little bit safer there about not letting too much bleed into my stories. Certainly the romance is easier for me to not copy from someone else just because my setting is so unique. It's, my city where I grew up and not where I live. So I don't think there's too many series written about Hampton, Virginia in that regard. So I feel pretty safe there. And then also it's something to be careful with the crime as well, because I love Mickey Spillane, Raymond Chandler, all those guys, and I do read their books. So, again, it's another thing you have to be careful of and make sure that you're not using something that they've copyrighted, a specific phrase, a specific character name, or use some piece of equipment, So it's a little bit easier there because a lot of that is kind of general reference to things like calling a gun a gat or something like that. That's not copyrighted. So, but you also want to be careful of your style and making sure that it's your voice and you're not copying purely Raymond Chandler's voice and his style or Mickey Spillane or something like that. So just things to be aware of and help in your research, checking to make sure what's copyrighted and what's not. If you've got any questions about that, you want to be mindful and respectful because you wouldn't want anyone to copy your work and not give you credit or profit from it without giving you credits. Just kind of keep that in mind. And people find out that you've done it, you'll lose all credibility. And if you're a fiction writer and you're hoping to make a living at this, it's going to really be hard to come back from that. I'm not saying it can't be done. Some people have done it, but it's really hard. And this is a competitive sport. So being a fiction writer and writing serial fiction is very competitive, and you don't want to ruin your chances of success by not researching and checking on something. So that's kind of all I have for you for this week. Encouraging you to do as much research as possible in your field, checking out the various resources available to you. Of course, we have so much available to us online. That's great, but just make sure that the online resource that you're using is also reputable, and see if you can find whatever information they're offering you, see if you can find that information from another source as well, just to be on the safe side, particularly if you're doing any kind of nonfiction writing. So fiction folks, we get a little bit more leeway in that regard. We can, fluff it up a little bit if we need to. So that's all I have. And again, I appreciate you this week. If you want to find out more about me, you can visit me at stitchesandstories.com. You can find my books there, my blog. You can find me as Melissa L. Story on Substack, Facebook, and X. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe over on Substack, or you can leave me a tip over as Melissa L. Story at Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. And I will see you next week.